Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the Executive Director of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. Welcome to our virtual brown bag event featuring presentations by NYMTC's 2022-2023 September 11th Memorial Scholars. The September 11th Memorial Program for Regional Transportation Planning was established in 2005 and honors 3 NYMTC staff members who perished in the attacks on the World Trade Center: Ignatius Adanga, Charles Lesperance, and See Wong Shum. The program aids students and organizations with projects in both academic and public policy arenas to educate and motivate those who are interested in transportation technology and planning. Before we begin, I would like to recognize our colleagues from the Rutgers Region 2 University Transportation Center, who are NYMTC's partners in this program. Dr. Patrick Sari, PhD, Associate Director, Marta Zurbruggen, Grant Facilitator, and Hao Wong, PhD, Associate Professor and Graduate Director. Hao Wong is with us today and would like to say a few words. Hao?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so do you mind I share a few slides?
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Just to give you a brief overview about the CATE, and hopefully we can have a even more productive collaboration with NYMTC next year. So we are CATE, actually located at Rutgers, focused on infrastructure and transportation. As you may know, actually, one of our focus is on the infrastructure repair and also transportation mobility. So we have 3 components: technical transfer, education, and also research. So the center actually is get direct funding from U.S. Department of Transportation, and also we work with the local many authorities like NYMTC. Also, just give you a brief idea about CATE. So we do have a very productive and also comprehensive research program. The sponsors actually coming from various federal and state agencies. And also we do engage a lot of faculties and students at Rutgers and also other universities in New Jersey and New York. And we do actually also hire a lot of professional staff and also especially students engaged in this research. Not only fully funded, but also partially funded students. Brief history about CATE. We started actually from 1996, and then we have been U.S. Department of Transportation, UTC, for a long time. Sometimes Tier 1 center, sometimes a regional center, and also national center. So in the recent compilation, we are part of the national center. And also you can see the history mark we have, starting with different labs and also data city, which actually focus on the mobility side too. So this gives you an overview about the collaboration we have in New York and New Jersey, actually mainly, especially in the recent regional center, which is going to be completed next year. We have Sony Buffalo, Cornell, Syracuse, Rowan, and also we have a few community college, also including Columbia University, Princeton, and so NJIT. So basically, really, it's a wide range collaboration in the Northeast region, especially New York and New Jersey. And in the new center, we are going to launch actually this year, later this year, but officially next year, is NCIT, National Center for Infrastructure Transformation. It will be led by the Prairie View University, and also we are part of the center, and also we'll continue our collaboration with NYMTC for sure. Okay, with that, just thank you for attending this symposium, and I'm glad everyone's here, and welcome to visit us at the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Hao. That was really exciting to hear about the UTC. Really appreciate that, and Kate. All right, I would also like to acknowledge one of the family members we have of our lost colleagues who are with us today, Renee Alexander, who is the fiance of Charles Lesperance. Renee has been part of the 9/11 Memorial Fellowship from its inception and helps select students for the program each year. Renee is also part of the academic world and serves as Associate Dean of Students and Senior Advisor to the Dean at Cornell University, as well as being the Director of Cornell's Intercultural Programs. Renee, would you like to say a few words?
I sure would, and good afternoon from Ithaca, New York. You know, as always, I'm delighted to be participating in this program, and it's become one of my favorite events. And you might ask why. If we hearken back to September 13th of 2001, our world was full of darkness and despair, but over time and slowly out of the darkness, we have moved into the light of what I call optimism, resilience, and hope. And we have invested in the future of preparing young, dynamic scholars for their lives to be intimately involved in transportation, planning, and policy. And they are eminently qualified to pick up the mantle of leadership. And so to them, I say, carry on, get out in the world and do a good job. And I will be participating in this program as long as it exists, which I hope is forever. So thank you, and it's great to be a part of this NYMTC family. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Renee. We're very excited to have you with us. That was terrific. Really appreciate it. Thank you. So, okay,
Certainly.
let's we'll move on to our scholars. Today we will hear from our 4 exceptional scholars. I'll introduce them first, and then we'll ask them to kick it off. So, Andres Castelo Rebeil is a Master of Regional Planning student at Cornell University with a passion for active transportation and mass transit. Rachel Elmke's AICP is an urban planner and data analyst. She holds a master's in regional planning from Cornell University. Brad Hershenson is an information science PhD student at the University at Albany with research interests in transportation policy, urban planning, micromobility, and environmental sustainability. And Jesse Ho is in the PhD program at the SUNY Buffalo Department of Civil Engineering with a concentration in transportation engineering. Andres, Rachel, and Jesse worked on projects here at NYMTC, while Brad was assigned to the New York City Department of Transportation. We are asking that you type any questions you have for our presenters in the chat function in WebEx. NYMTC staff will moderate the chat and will address your questions to the scholars after all 4 have completed their presentations. We will address as many questions as time permits before concluding at 1:30. Please turn off your cameras and microphones unless, of course, you are one of our speakers. And I also want to note for those of us who are certified planners that this event is eligible for 1 certification maintenance credit from the American Planning Association. And with that, I would like to introduce Andres.
Thank you so much, Adam, for the introduction. And thank you, Renee, for your poignant and inspiring words. They were beautiful. So, hi, everyone. Again, my name is Andres Castelo. And today I'm going to talk about equitable traffic safety programs in the NYMTC suburban counties. So before I dive into the details of my project, I would like to first make some acknowledgements to the people who, in one way or another, supported me and guided me throughout the process. Sherry South, Mary Byrne, Nicholas Klein, Jerry Bogax, Ali Afshar, Deborah Nelson, Mukhtar Mola, thank you so much for your help. So I'm going to provide some context first. So the main goal of this project was to identify ways to coordinate, expand, and enhance equitable traffic safety programs and safety education programs in the suburban counties of the NYMTC planning area. Given the equity lens of this project, a special focus of the project was to focus on pedestrians in vulnerable populations or communities of concern, as NYMTC calls them. And it also had a special focus on areas in the vicinity of schools. And I was to achieve this goal by first reviewing existing research on safety programs implemented both in the United States and internationally. I also performed benchmarking research looking at programs implemented by other metropolitan planning organizations in the United States. And I also documented programs and strategies implemented by NYMTC. And drawing from all of this information that I gathered, I came up with a series of opportunities and best practices that NYMTC could incorporate into their system and their organizational structure to improve safety programs in the region. So starting with the background research, when it comes to equitable traffic safety and education programs, especially with a focus on safety for pedestrians, the most recurring approaches would be Vision Zero, the Safe Systems approach, the Complete Streets approach, and the Safe Routes to Schools approach. These are considered, one would say, like the gold standard when it comes to addressing issues of pedestrian safety. And the measures proposed by these approaches are in one way or another, intersect with what the industry calls the 6 E's of traffic safety. I'm gonna go over these 6 E's just very briefly for the people who might not be too familiar with what they are. So starting with engineering, I think is kind of self-explanatory. They can include any infrastructure that is installed to better accommodate pedestrians along a road. They can take the form of roundabouts, sidewalks. Sidewalks are obviously key when it comes to pedestrian safety. Improved crosswalks. Here in the picture on the right, we can see a crosswalk with clear signalization, a pedestrian safety island. And these infrastructures are just that I just mentioned are just to name a few. There are obviously many other measures that are applied according to the conditions and needs of each place. And education, I would say it's also self-explanatory. They can include in-class presentations, online and physical educational information, public awareness campaigns, and these are just to better to teach people how to better engage in safe walking behaviors. Encouragement is fairly it's closely related to education. The difference is that encouragement is more of a hands-on approach. They include walk to school days in the context of biking. They include bike rodeos, walking school buses, walking competitions, again to teach people how to engage in safe walking behaviors. There's also enforcement, which is about obviously ensuring the compliance of traffic safety laws and regulations. There's human enforcement, like police officers, state highway patrols, and sheriff's offices. And there's automated enforcement, which includes speed and red light cameras. Then we have evaluation. Evaluation in the context of safety or pedestrian safety is about assessing the existing conditions of a road, and it can also be about assessing the impacts of a specific measure to improve safety in an area. They can take the form of data reporting and collection, road safety audits, and the analysis of key performance indicators. And last but not least, we have equity as the last E. Equity in the context of pedestrian safety is about identifying vulnerable populations or vulnerable groups within a population, and also identifying the areas where these vulnerable groups might be, where there might be a high concentration of these groups. And the activities related to equity can take the form of community engagement events, increased enforcement, and focused investment in these vulnerable areas. So the 6 E's can be promising definitely when addressing issues of safety, but they can also have their shortcomings. Some of the solutions can be very costly, and smaller municipalities can lack the funding. They can also lack the experts or volunteers to implement them. The prioritization, the project prioritization and the area prioritization might be inadequate. The educational material might be outdated, and also the language barrier can be an issue for people whose first language is not English. They can have also low levels of effectiveness just because it's a diverse country, and also the sociocultural perspectives can change. The driving culture, the walking culture can change from one place to another. So sometimes they might not be as effective as planned. Increased enforcement in some areas can be perceived as biased or discriminatory. The data, especially talking about the collection, the reporting, and the analysis of the data, can be extremely inconsistent, or there can even be a complete lack of that data to do a complete analysis of the conditions of a place. The impacts might be too generalized, and by this I mean that we oftentimes assume that a specific measure will impact the population equally, but that is not always the case. There are different groups that are impacted differently by specific transportation safety projects. The participation can also be an issue, especially talking about low-income communities. People living in these communities might work multiple jobs, so they might not have the time to fully participate in these community engagement events. So we might not get a complete understanding of what their challenges are. And also the equity factor might not have sufficient weight in these transportation and the design and planning of these transportation projects. So as I mentioned before, another task for this project was to conduct benchmarking research, looking at other MPOs and the programs that they implemented. I looked at 10 MPOs, which can be seen in the picture on the right. And the reasons why I selected these MPOs vary. Some of them were some of the largest MPOs in the country. Others belonged to the Vision Zero network, and other MPOs simply had programs that were worth considering and recognizing. And I also looked at NYMTC. So I looked at 3 main categories. I looked at their groups, which include committees, subcommittees, and task forces. in working groups. I also looked at their materials, which include information, tools, data, and I looked at their initiatives, which include programs and strategies, just to name a few. And in the case of NYMTC, I also conducted interviews with staff members of the suburban counties. These suburban counties include Nassau, Suffolk, Putnam, Rockland, and Westchester. And I conducted these interviews just to have a better understanding of what these counties are doing at a more local level. So drawing from all of this information that I gathered, all of this existing research that I analyzed, all of this benchmarking research that I conducted, and these interviews that I conducted, I came up with a series of best practices that NYMTC could possibly incorporate into their strategies to improve safety. So starting with best practices for groups, when I looked at metropolitan planning organizations, I noticed that they had specific groups to address specific issues. For example, there was an equity group in some MPOs. There were community engagement groups. There were special needs groups to attend to attend the needs of people with disabilities and seniors. There were Vision Zero, Safe Systems, Complete Streets groups, and there were information resources exchange groups. The information resources exchange group was interesting, but because these groups were dedicated to exchange information, obviously, and ideas on the current and future trends when it comes to transportation and safety. For example, there's an increasing trend on micromobility, which Rachel will talk about shortly. There's also increasing automated vehicles. And there's also an increasing trend in the legalization of specific substances like cannabis. And smaller municipalities might not be adapting at the same rate of these changes. So an information resources exchange group would be very beneficial to, stay up to date with what those changes and those trends are. So what NYMTC could do, they could leverage their safety advisory working group, which is a group that already exists, and they are already making great efforts to address safety in the region. So NYMTC could expand the charges of these groups to include equity, community engagement, people with special needs, Vision Zero, information resources exchange. And in the case these responsibilities go beyond the scope of what the safety advisory working group can do, they could consider creating new groups to address these problems individually. So when it comes to best practices for information and material, NYMTC could possibly leverage its transportation information gateway, which is a platform that already exists, and it includes mainly data, transportation data. So they could leverage this platform to include other material. They could include an equity resource guide or assessment toolkit. They could include complete streets toolkits, public engagement, educational material in different languages, and safe routes to school frameworks and safety campaign toolkits, just to name a few. And the idea of all of this is that smaller municipalities can have a point of reference and a centralized information hub that they can easily access, and that way the coordination will be better across jurisdictions in the region. They will be pursuing the same goals and the same approaches, and it'll also be a great tool to it'll be a great way of not depending on trained professionals that they might not have. Again, one problem was that oftentimes smaller municipalities don't have qualified staff, so being able to access this information would be very beneficial. In the case of best practices for initiatives, I'm just going to mention a couple here, just for the sake of time. So what NYMTC could do, they could create a technical assistance program. A program like this would consist of providing smaller municipalities, again, municipalities that don't have qualified staff. NYMTC could provide this trained professionals like engineers so that they can support these municipalities in the planning and design process, and for the creation of new pedestrian infrastructure measures. And they could also create a consultant assistance program, so that it's similar to the technical assistance program, but the consultant assistance program would be more focused on the grant writing process. That way, the trained trained professionals from NYMTC could support smaller municipalities who lack those professionals. They could help them write applications to access funding, and that way the costs of implementing certain measures like engineering measures or infrastructures, the cost should be less of an issue. Other things to consider, we should consider being more proactive. We cannot expect vulnerable populations to come to us. We need to take a more proactive approach and come to them. And one way of doing this would be through the creation of partnerships with community-based groups and nonprofit organizations. We should expand our communication channels just to better improve coordination across agencies and municipalities, and also expand communication channels just for the exchange of ideas. Again, we could consider rising technologies, especially in the context of data collection, reporting, and analysis. We should expand our definition of equity, not to just include race and income. We should also consider people of a vulnerable age, like children and seniors. We should consider issues of gender, language proficiency, people with disabilities, households without vehicle, just a few to name. We should normalize crash counts, maybe per capita or per vehicle miles traveled instead of total crash counts. We should focus more the responsibility on the drivers. Right now, the educational material is very focused on the victims, and it doesn't matter how much a pedestrian decides to engage in safe walking behaviors, drivers might just decide to drive recklessly. So again, we should also focus more education on the drivers. And also, we should break the silos. We should increase collaboration and coordination with other municipal departments, especially public works department, police departments, because they also work very closely with matters of pedestrian safety. So again, we should increase coordination and collaboration. And just as some final remarks, it is important to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The NYMTC planning area can be very large, and the conditions and the needs and the challenges can change from one municipality to another. So whatever measure that NYMTC implements must be made adaptable to the conditions of each place. It will be a trial and error process of continuous learning and adaptation. And once we understand all of this, we should be, suburban counties should be better equipped to address issues of safety in the region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andres. That was really great. I like some of the ideas you had in there about grant writing and the expanding communications and the partnerships with the non-governmental organizations. Really great ideas. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. We will now hear from Rachel. Rachel, you're up.
Thanks so much, Adam, for that introduction. I do appreciate it. I would like to, before I dive in, say hi, I'm Rachel. And there are certainly a lot of people to thank for this presentation. Ignatius Adanga, Charles Lesperance, and See Wong Shum, again, for whom the program is named. I want to thank NYMTC, NICE, Rutgers, Renee, Dr. Klein, John, Larissa, Ali, Mora, Stephanie, Fidel, Setu. Again, you all contributed to this project, and I just want to really thank you. So I'm going to be talking about opportunities to reduce single occupancy car travel through shared mobility and micromobility. So, as most of us know, the transportation sector is responsible for the lion's share of emissions in the US. So, addressing climate change is really going to mean rethinking how we travel. Shared mobility and micromobility in the context of this project is going to refer mainly to e-bikes and e-scooters. So most of us are familiar with this kind of work that's going on in New York City. They have a much loved city bike program, but bringing these kinds of interventions, e-bikes and e-scooters, to the suburbs and to smaller cities can be a lot harder when they have less density and less protective infrastructure like protected bike lanes. So what I've set out to do in alignment with NYMTC's long-range plan was identifying exactly where outside the city in terms of census block groups we could bring e-bikes and e-scooter programs where they had the most potential to be used and where they had the most potential to increase economic opportunity like access to jobs. So I was looking at these 5 counties here: Nassau, Suffolk, Rockland, Westchester, and Putnam. In looking to answer exactly where these e-bike and e-scooter programs should go, I started with a very broad-based literature review. And in the literature review, I had 2 goals, basically. I was trying to determine what were the characteristics of programs that worked and didn't work, and what measures were taken by these different programs to center racial and economic equity in implementation. For those who are specifically interested in that element of implementation, I do recommend looking at the Equity in Shared Mobility database by Anne Brown, which really highlights some of these aspects, and I think is important, very important, for more detail. So from the literature review, I identified all of the variables that I ended up using in the suitability analysis. So the first were the demographic variables here. And I also looked at variables related to the built environment. So when it came to these, I really wanted to focus in on some of the specific factors that keep people from using modes of transportation that aren't cars. And again, what we saw in the literature review was that protected infrastructure works. Protected infrastructure is what makes people on e-bikes and e-scooters feel comfortable enough to ride. And another highly important factor was density. So employment density and housing density was critically important to the success of these programs. NYMTC also was interested in encouraging and how to encourage large institutions to basically bring in more people on e-bikes and e-scooters and replace some of that car traffic. So I was looking at bigger institutions like colleges, universities, and large employers. I do want to take a moment just to discuss the weights that I used. So each variable was either weighted with regular values, so think 0 to 10, or reverse values, so think 10 to 0. The most important thing to keep in mind is that only 3 of these variables were reverse valued, and that was percent non-Hispanic white alone, median household income, and distance to transit. This means that census block groups were rated more highly when they had a larger percentage non-white population, when they had a lower income, or when they were closer to public transit options. Reverse valuing in the case of income and race serves a few different purposes. So one was to encourage more investment in BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color neighborhoods and lower income neighborhoods to help counterbalance environmental racism and a historic lack of investment. The reason for reverse valuing in terms of distance to transit is that e-bikes and e-scooters tend to be used for shorter trips. We know this based on the research, so shorter trips under 5 kilometers. And I'll just discuss some other pieces of the methodology, and then we'll dive right into the results. Again, we've discussed the reverse valuing, the weights of 1 to 3, with 3 being the most important and 1 being the least important. And again, these factors were determined by the literature review. I put all of the values on a common scale, and this is just typical practice. And z-scoring, I think, does require a little bit more explanation for those of you who haven't sat in on a statistics class lately. The z-scores just demonstrate how far outside the mean or the norm the census block groups were. So essentially, I use this to highlight very outstanding opportunities for e-bikes and e-scooters because I wanted to show not just where this was good, but where this was a great option. So there were 3 areas that had the highest z-scores for suitability according to the model, and those were Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and Hempstead. First, I'm going to show and discuss some details of the overall results, and then we'll dive into those 3 areas in a little bit more detail. So this is the overall map of results, and the highest scoring block groups are in the darkest brown color. It mainly follows the patterns that you would expect with knowledge of the major highway corridors and the main transit lines like Metro North and the Long Island Railroad. So again, just to reiterate, these were block groups with z-scores over 1.5. So they were 1.5 standard deviations above the mean, and that was the number of census block groups total in each municipality that fit that standard or higher. So again, these are exceptional examples. So you can see Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and Hempstead topping the list, but we also have smaller municipalities here, New Rochelle, Peekskill, White Plains to some extent, and New Rochelle obviously has had its own foray into shared mobility and micromobility. With the vendor VO, there were bikes and e-scooters, and they also took equity issues into account. So there were options for those without a bank or a smartphone. I believe there were reduced fare options as well. That was really good work. White Plains had OFO bikes and Lime bikes that were in the city in 2018. OFO did pull out about 6 weeks later, and I believe Lime remains until 2020. Peekskill had a Beeline on demand. And they were selected for a Phase 1 grant through New York's Clean Transportation Prizes program. And you know, we shouldn't be thinking about these areas in isolation. I think it's really important to consider that these higher scoring areas had clusters. So we really want to think about how e-bikes and e-scooters are going to be able to connect these areas together. So Yonkers was, as I've said, the #1 high scorer. And there were about 1,000 regular and pedal-assisted Lime bikes in Yonkers back in 2018, but Lime did leave the city in 2020. Bird was then tapped to bring e-scooters to Yonkers later that year, but that ended in 2022. And in looking into some of the reasoning behind that, there were online reports suggesting that the company was under some financial stress. For those of you that are a little bit less familiar with the area, this slide gives an idea of the tremendous transportation resources that are available in Yonkers, particularly around the border. So there are multiple Amtrak and Metro North stations, and there's a commuter bus to connect riders to the subway. Mount Vernon had the second highest number of block groups with scores of or over 1.5. So there are a very high percentage of car-free households here, and as Andres noted, this should be, you know, a basis of providing equitable services. So in Mount Vernon, it was over 30%. The potential user base for micromobility users here is high. So investment in non-car transportation options in Mount Vernon is likely to have a very big impact. So like Yonkers, Mount Vernon has a very high number of high-scoring block groups spread out over a fairly large area, and it's 23 block groups altogether. There are also a ton of transportation options here. So we have Beeline buses, 3 Metro North stations, 2 New York City subway lines fairly close, and all 3 of Mount Vernon's Metro North stations, Fleetwood, Mount Vernon West, and Mount Vernon East, are participating in an MTA pilot created after its first mile, last mile study, which is looking to improve connections to commuter rail without cars. Hempstead is an outlier. So the available data in Long Island is very limited for reasons that I'll get into a bit later, but it has the only high scoring census block group cluster in Long Island. For transportation purposes, Hempstead is a relatively easy commute to New York City for those who work there. It's just under an hour to Grand Central Terminal with the completion of this year's MTA extension project. The LIRR's Hempstead stop is also near the center of the high-scoring census block group cluster in terms of the summed weighted scores. So this project ran into a few difficulties in terms of the applicability of the model. One of the key issues here was missing or incomplete data, particularly on protected bike lanes, best outreach practices to larger institutions, and trips that weren't conducted for work. You may have seen from my variables list that the Smart Location Database, the variables released by the EPA, formed a large basis of all of the variables used in this data set. And unfortunately, 1,300 census block groups had to be eliminated from the analysis because the block groups either didn't have transportation system coverage or because the block group exceeded the distance to transit threshold that the Smart Location Database set. And this does make sense in the context of this research, right? Because we're really looking at interconnectedness. So areas that don't have a lot of public transit options, you know, it doesn't make as much sense when you're really considering how to integrate e-bikes and e-scooters, right? The other item worth addressing here is the walkability index, again from the Smart Location Database, was used as a proxy to identify areas that are more walkable, that are more friendly to e-bikes and e-scooters. But again, the analysis would have been more accurate with the location of the protected bike lanes. Further research should focus on building out a standardized automated model to assess suitability and prioritization of towns and cities for shared mobility and micromobility. And like Andres said, there should definitely be opportunities built in to customize the model to local concerns, because NYMTC serves a very wide range of communities with different needs. And even more than research, building on the findings from this paper and others like it is going to call for advocacy and transparency. Municipalities should require private operators to share usage data, and that data should also be shared with the public. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics has already acknowledged big gaps in data for parking and active transportation infrastructure, and they should be pressured to provide this important information to the public. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. That was really good information. For those of us who were very happy to put our statistics classes in the rearview mirror, it was great to hear you talk a little bit about the Z-scoring to help explain it more of a rudimentary way for goofballs like me. And also, I'm not that familiar with the Smart Location Database, so you've sparked my interest in that, and I'm looking forward to exploring that a little further, even citing the gaps that you noted. So, and the additional research. So thank you very much. Really appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Adam.
Great presentation. Next up, I believe we have Brad who will be presenting. Brad, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. Can everybody see this?
It looks a little small. If you can make the one slide take up the whole, that's better. Now it looks great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brad Hershenson, and I'm a PhD student at the University at Albany in the Information Science program, and I'm studying transportation technology. And today I'm going to share with you some of my project, which focuses on cycling culture in New York City and how to increase safe ridership. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge a few folks. And to start, I know it's been said, but I'd just like to say it again. It really is an honor to serve as a fellow in memory of the NYMTC staff who lost their lives during the September 11th attacks. I know this time is particularly dear to the hearts of the NYMTC staff, friends, family, and for the city of New York. And I know that we will carry out their legacy in the transportation and planning work that we do each and every day. I'd also like to thank my research mentor, Omar, from the New York City Department of Transportation, as well as my academic advisor, Dr. Lawson, and of course the staff at NYMTC for all of their support, Executive Director Levine, Maura, and Stephanie, who made sure that every single detail of today was going to go exactly as planned, so I really appreciate that. Deb, Jerry, Seitu, Fidel, and so many others whose guidance, support, and assistance came and made today special and is very much appreciated. So to start, I began to compile, review, and analyze various planning and transportation related documents from the New York City Department of Transportation and other sources, some of which are NYMTC member agencies. And by reviewing various literature related to ridership trends and patterns such as the New York City Mobility Report, New York City Streets Plan, mobility surveys, and other documents, I gained an understanding and background of cycling culture and transportation culture in and around the city. The New York City Department of Transportation focuses on something called PIAs, which are priority investment areas, where certain funding for projects or initiatives is directed. The priority is not solely based upon transportation-related factors, but also broader indicators of neighborhood need. So the New York City Department of Transportation hosts a variety of imperative programs, many being educational in nature, to bring resources directly to residents within communities and spread awareness about new projects, as well as seek input and collect data. I had the opportunity to join for Car Free Earth Day back in April with folks from the New York City DOT. On the left, you can see there's various agencies and community groups tabling. On the right, there's some folks from the DOT bike unit, including myself and my research mentor, Omar. That day, we were also joined by the New York City Transportation Commissioner, Udanis Rodriguez, who of course came to the event on bicycle and spoke to residents in the Heights about bike safety, the health benefits of cycling, and the importance of community involvement. So of the various programs that DOT runs, one of the most important is the Bike the Block series that brings numerous resources directly to residents across the 5 boroughs. These events are typically day-long events that aim to improve and expand community engagement in support of street improvement projects, empower communities to reimagine their streets, and create a platform for local cycling advocacy. They feature an open street style event focused on bicycle programming and education in transportation priority investment areas, featuring tips for safe riding, bike law education, group rides, bike repairs. You can see me on the left side at one of the bike repair and fix-it stations, as well as health, wellness, and cultural programming. So one of the most important elements of these programs, however, is the ability to connect with neighborhood residents and receive feedback on various projects or initiatives. So for example, one project was to solicit feedback on the Harlem River Greenway implementation plan. We received a lot of feedback on this project as people really wanted to attend sessions to provide input, learn about the project, and stay up to date on developments. And there was great interest in providing input and attending meetings and public workshops, virtual and in person as well. Another was to receive feedback on changes to the Cross Bronx Expressway. Needless to say, there were numerous complaints surrounding the expressway, including a comment or two on just bulldozing the entire thing. But I just want to note that it's important to share that folks really talked about access to healthcare, food, safety for children, and other topics were brought up at that event. And you can see me on the right with a picture of a 3D model of a section of the expressway. This was a great draw at the event, as everybody wanted to come take a look, ask questions about what it was, and then we were able to segue them into participation in collecting feedback to reimagine the area and the corridor. So at the Bike the Block sessions, I had the opportunity to connect with children, parents, families, experienced bikers, beginner bikers, and pretty much everybody in between. And here is where we promoted safe cycling through educational demonstrations, had the opportunity to collect survey data on cycling in the city, and prepared questions to receive information from cyclists on how often they ride, their cycling habits, what factors may prevent them or prepare them for cycling in and around their neighborhood or borough. Pictured here is myself and the Staten Island Assistant Borough Commissioner assisting with helmet fitting and setting up folks for free bike rentals. And we directed folks to ride within an enclosed area to learn from instructors from Bike New York if they needed assistance. So shifting gears a little bit into the survey itself aims to seek information about biking habits by asking about various factors: safe biking infrastructure or lack thereof, physical limitations, weather conditions, whether or not folks know how to ride a bike. And we had 113 participants. Of the participants, an overwhelming majority of those who responded said they were female, and then about half of the respondents identified as white. So jumping into a few of the important questions, what is your primary mode of transportation for daily trips? And here's a snapshot. The highest rated answer was personal car, followed by subway, tied with walking, and then biking. And our survey and data collection occurred at the Bike the Block events, where residents were directly asked within their communities, some of which could use better access to public transit, as some folks don't have necessarily the greatest access to certain modes of travel, particularly to certain destinations such as employment, healthcare, or even just access to sustainable groceries and food. How often do you currently use a bicycle for transportation purposes? This question was interesting because you can see somewhat of a bimodal distribution of these results. The most frequent responses from respondents showed individuals who either biked very frequently in the light blue, or those who bike very infrequently, just maybe a few times a year in green. And those Bike the Block events really continue to be a huge success and draw visitors from bicycle enthusiasts to folks looking to participate in learn to ride sessions or just find out more about how they can commute and ride safely. So when you bike, how far do you usually travel? Respondents favored trips to other nearby neighborhoods, followed by short trips around the neighborhood. Which of the following measures would encourage you to bike more often? This question is very important because the participants from a variety of backgrounds chose to expand and improve biking infrastructure. An interesting runner-up was to provide more secure parking facilities, which makes you think about those first and last mile connections. I know Rachel just mentioned some of that in the last presentation, and it really seems to be a key element and factor here. And other items I want to mention as well is where people are storing their bicycles, whether or not they're protected from rain or elements, and how close they may be located to various destinations or trip generators. How likely are you to bike more often if there was more bike infrastructure in the city? The results from this question seem to be self-explanatory, really demonstrating a high likelihood of bikers utilizing safer infrastructure on a regular basis if implemented. So after a review of these and other questions, the various results from the survey really indicate that variety of factors, one of which being clearly a want for safer infrastructure, may help induce an influx of more biking on our corridors. Connecting directly with residents in the community has provided us with the ability to yield results that show which elements of biking residents would like to see, and those that would further enhance the uptake of more cyclists. Respondents were supportive of reallocating space on roadways for bike lanes, enjoyed and favored community educational events and programming to promote biking, and would like to see more policies geared towards cyclists and enhancing the recreational and health-related elements of the mode of transportation as well. One other element I would like to add is that I had the opportunity to participate in several of the New York City Department of Transportation Community Bike Working Group meetings where members of the bike unit and other DOT staff and officials directly engage with bike advocates, community leaders, nonprofits, and just interested parties as a whole. And this was a forum for discussion on the pressing issues surrounding cycling in the city, sharing information on new programs, discussing current events, in the streets and the roadways. And one particular element that I wanted to note is that connecting with such advocates on a regular basis, combined with that direct community outreach such as been done here, provides for the ability to analyze policies holistically, identify priority investment areas and needs, and allow for growth in how positive change is made. For example, this can be the rollout of communication materials such as palm cards to relay the law to cyclists and road users, identify strategies for bike lane implementation and adoption, and can lead to areas for further research and development, especially as we are connecting directly with the users of the roadways and advocates. Ultimately, residents of the city have many options for traveling and getting around town. Cycling can prove to be a healthy option that can be quick, safe, and fun for many in the right circumstance. Our results in community engagement on the topic provide an insight as to how riders with different commuting and biking patterns view the topic. The common theme throughout displays a want for safer and more infrastructure to support cycling, with educational materials and programming to support cyclists from a variety of backgrounds and skill levels. Thank you.
That was really great, Brad. Thank you. Yeah, it was the folks at New York City DOT are doing terrific work in cycling, and it's really good that you got to work with them on it and to go out to those safety events and the Bike the Block events and reimagining the Cross Bronx. That 3D map looked really cool. So I think they still have a couple or more of those events coming up on Saturdays, the rest of the month, something along those lines. So hopefully folks can get out and take a look at those events too, up in the Bronx. So thank you again, Brad. That was terrific. All right, and our last speaker for this session is Jesse. Jesse, are you ready to go?
Sorry, I should start my video and voice before I share my screen, but that's fine. So yeah,
All right,
you can see
great.
clearly. So thank you, and for the introduction was great. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the takeaway from the research project to you and share that with you in the event. So the research project, the topic of this research project is evaluating the practicality and implications of using the open source mapping network as the transportation network for the NYBPM. So there are two objectives tailored to this presentation. Firstly, evaluate OpenStreetMap network as a tool to update the transportation network in the New York best practice model, which is the NYBPM, and also recommend enhancement or alternatives to the existing transportation network models. Before everything goes into this research project, I'm going to introduce what is the New York best practice model. It's an analytical tool that uses mathematical formulas to estimate people's travel behavior in a specific region. That is the region on the right map. You can see there are 28 counties and portions of 3 states, including New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. That's why it requires a lot of input, including highway, transit network, as well as these attributes and values. So what is NYBPM for? It estimates people's travel behavior firstly model what's the purpose for people to travel. Is for shopping or for working, and when people leave their home in morning rush hour or in mid-afternoon, where is the destination for people's travel? If it's Midtown Manhattan, and how people travel to there, by bus, by subway, or drive alone, and specifically which route or path people take them. Say these specific subway lines, and sorry. So travel behavior is estimated using the NYBPN's transportation networks. Let's see NYBPN networks for traveler analysis. As you can see on the map, it covers all major highway and transit modes. There are more than 7,000 railway segments and over 600 transit routes, and it uses multi-year analysis, including attributes from a base year as a current data set to forecast future years as the predictions. So that's why modeling and updating efforts and cost change over time, or say specifically increase over time. So do networks and attributes. In this very large and complex network, data requirements are pretty much high, especially for VPN updates. So because network attribute need update regularly, and in some cases, new attribute need to be added to for specific purposes or interest. So a lot of data required for estimating and updating the NYBPN. So OpenStreetMap, OSM, is a possible source for updating or adding unique data attributes to the network. So what's the current data attributes in the NYBPN network? For a highway network, it includes direction of the lane, number of lanes, is parking permitted on certain link, is highway tolled and which condition could be modeled, and if pedestrians and bicyclists allowed on a certain link. It also includes for a transit network, if there's bus-only lanes, and where are these bus route stops located. So let's see how the OpenStreetMap OSM could provide network and value to the NYBPN. On the left map, it's OSM's highway network. As you can see, it's color-coded, which means that in OSM, there's certain terminology to describe this importance of the link segment. From the most important, they are motorway, trunk, primary, secondary, and their associated connectors, say links. But they're also an OSM network. They also include living street or residential road, as well as service road. So on the right map, you can see their different purposes that user, not just me, but also you could utilize all these attributes for this different purposes, including pedestrian, cycleway, parking, transit, and railway. When I say use this data or attribute explicitly, I'm referring to use OSM as a search engine, or say Google it, type certain keywords of interest, and the result will come up with you. So these are graphical representations from OSM. But they're not just maps, they are also attributes on each roadway segment. From the left table, you can see this OSM describes a lot of interaction for pedestrian with the built environment, including the foot access, where's the sidewalk, is the sidewalk shared with bicycle, and how about the location of the sidewalk? There's a lot, and you can see these values are countable. See, and not just pedestrian, but also for bicyclists. You can see on the right table this whole bunch of attributes describing how bicyclists could interact with the infrastructure, including the bicycle lane, if the cycleway has buffer, if there's dedicated bicycle lane on certain link, and also where's the location of the cycleway, and including if there's specific route for cyclists or they travel. So always talking about OSM features, we may agree that OSM has potential to add non-motorized modes into the NYBP and transportation planning framework through the graphical presentation as maps in the previous slide, but we can also do it qualitatively. See in the table, you can see that different OSM layers, including highway, pedestrian, and cycleway. And I also list their number of links, the link lengths, and in terms of miles, how we could quantify the use of all the overall data set. Say the use of data set, I also list these data source. As you can see, this layer could be tagged as highway or highway for pedestrian, or say route for cycleway. So OSM is a publicly available dataset for network attribute data. Enhance or say foster additional possibilities for travel demand forecasting. For example, there are current plans prepared for agency in Portland and Atlanta that use OSM to access regional state networks for multimodal travel and investigate improvement opportunities. That's why this modern research utilized, as you can see in the previous presentation, that to encourage this different mobility or say bicycle traveling, is important to utilize this publicly available data set. Let's say a little bit beyond OSM potentials. Believe it or not, there's magic in transportation planning. We as transportation planner or engineers, in the past, we focus more on motor vehicles. Then we design or build or construct highway and then expand highway lanes. Then we have to control emission. We have to reduce congestion. And we then have to deal with high initial maintenance cost on both vehicle and infrastructure side. In the past, we didn't focus more on transportation equity. If we'll be able to pay more attention on transportation equity, then perhaps we could promote the use of non-motorized modes. These slower traffic that literally has no emission, say zero emissions. and their cost on both vehicle and infrastructure are fairly low compared to these motor vehicles. So that's why OSM community volunteers record real-time, or say temporal and spatial updates through the public database. Therefore, adopting OSM could be a sustainable solution as the transportation network becomes more inclusive for multimodal road users. So these are possible next steps for NYMTC to use OSM. If we may agree that OSM data adds value to potential NYBPM network extension, including but not limited to network coverage through this massive amount of available attributes. And these attributes are mostly on multimodal information on micromobility, say bike lanes, sidewalks, parking lane, building footprint, entrance location access paths, and even more. So possible next steps would be to evaluate if these very controlled resources help with better estimates as the NYBPM's purposes, and to streamline modeling process to leverage OSM's frequent updates. Also, expand attribute with specific road users that may be updated in the NYBPM network. Yeah, that's all. That's all for the technical part I could share through in the presentation, and I'm happy to have a chance to thanks NYMTC and the September 11th Memorial Program to sponsor anything included to complete the final report. And the final report is pretty much the technical one, and it must be done with the guidance of Lynn, Ali, and Munaj because their hard work and providing support and professional support. That's very important. So, thank you. Thank you for your time and attention in the past couple minutes, and I wish you enjoy this presentation.
Thank you, Jesse. That was really great. And you had really excellent help, I'm sure, from Lynn, Ali, and Munesh, who are experts in the NYBPM. So thank you for that. And I was interested to see that there are 23 variations of cycleway in the OpenStreet map, at least in the graphic that you showed. So I can only imagine how many variations there are for every kind of attribute that could be listed. So looks like it's really robust and something that I'm sure we'll be taking a look at in the days and weeks to come. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to all of our presenters. I think we're at the point in the program where Stephanie Brooks can let us know if there is anyone in the chat or anyone who submitted questions. Stephanie, do we have any questions yet?
No, not yet, but folks can feel free to put any questions they may have into the chat and we can get them to the students.
Well, I'm going to start with a question then for Jesse. So Jesse, you can put yourself, since you spoke most recently, you mentioned, I'm curious about the OpenStreetMap network of volunteers who update it. Who are the folks who are the community volunteers? Are they in academia? Are they just folks with a passion for updating maps? I mean, how do they go about doing that, and how do you join?
Anyone could be able to be, let me rephrase this a little bit. Anyone could utilize this OpenStreet data source, and anyone with some registration process would be able to be the volunteer to update all these network, but that also requires an audit process through.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah,
that's good. I would expect.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It feels like it's the Wikipedia of maps.
True. Yes. Yes.
That's great. That's great. Oh, I think we're getting some questions in. Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you then.
We have a question, and it's for you, Jesse. So it's good you're.
Okay.
Why did you analyze OpenStreetMap rather than OpenCycleMap?
That's an excellent question. So the purpose of this research project is not only for cyclists. One most important thing is to think about possibility to extend current NYBPN's network. Second, I didn't make this very clear, but to extend any possible attribute into the NYBPN's network. So it's not just about cycle. So Open Cycle Map could be a very good resource for updating this bicyclist infrastructure or say facility on any link, but we may want to use some very inclusive one because yeah, that would be the research purposes. So yeah, thank you for sharing, and I would love to know more.
And no other chat questions as of yet, but feel free to add them into the chat for any of the students on the presentations.
Okay, well, then I'm going to ask a kind of a general question. What did you, and it doesn't have to, Jesse's already answered the last couple. So Jesse, I'll give you a little bit of a break and I'll start with Andres, but it's going to be the same question for everybody. What did you find to be, I guess, the most challenging aspect of the work that you were working on here for us?
I would say, okay, so this was not just for the sake of keeping this presentation short. I did not include this in my presentation. Part of the project also involved mapping school zones near the communities of concern of NYMTC. And as part of that mapping, I also tried to include pedestrian crash data. NYMTC already has a great platform. There, it's being developed and perfected. But I would say that yes, accessing that data, data not only for pedestrian crash data, also for identifying K through 12 schools, and yeah, and I also when I retrieve the data, I would say that possibly the consistency of the data. I wouldn't say I'm not sure if the data is consistent, but there's always that possibility, right? So yes, I would say that data retrieving possibly is a huge challenge. Sometimes.
I could see that. Yeah, there are so many different folks that are gathering that data and putting it into the system that, yeah, there are going to be different approaches to how that data is compiled. So yeah, I could see that being a challenge. It's a challenge on, I think, in the agencies as well.
Yes.
Rachel, same question.
Yeah, I would agree with Andres in that it was a challenge figuring out which elements of the project to highlight in the 15-minute segment. And then I think, you know, it's always a little bit frustrating as a planner to kind of be reminded of the wide gap between sort of like acknowledged best practices and the way that things currently are. But that just means there's lots of opportunities to move forward. So that's I think a good positive take on it. But it was really an excellent learning experience for me, and I'm grateful for that.
Sounds like a little bit of turning lemons into lemonade. So that was a great way to phrase that. Thank you.
I would love
Brad, how about you?
also like to make an addition to.
Oh, yes, Andres, sorry.
Another thing, part of the research was to conduct a literature review, right? And oftentimes the best practices are very focused on urban contexts. Is there a microphone? Oftentimes the information is available for urban context, so it's hard to identify appropriate solutions for suburban context. I would say that was also another challenge.
And I'm just going to ask Ali Afshar to please mute your microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, Andres. Brad.
Thank you. Yeah, as folks were talking, I was thinking, about some of the challenging aspects and elements. And I think one piece in particular that stands out to me is there's so many different moving parts related to so many different projects. So speaking with cyclists and just families and just citizens that are participating in some of the events that we did, just like explaining why we're there and what we're doing is in itself a challenge. And then once you get over that hurdle of, here's a bell or, a whistle, or here's a fender for your bike, and these are safety elements, and, this is something you can have and take. And once you get over that piece, and then people start to understand and realize like what's happening and why this is happening in their community. And then once you can kind of get over that hurdle, most people are certainly willing to spend 10, 15 minutes, even more, just talking about why they live there and why they like to make improvements to their community. But I just noticed there was just a little bit of a challenge just initially with conversations with folks about, why we're in their community and why we're doing a survey and why we're trying to make it a better place for them to live and be and cycle. So I think as time went on, it became easier to talk to people and explain some of this stuff to people. But there is that initial reaction of like, what's going on here, and why is this event happening, and who are all these people? But people really appreciate that ability bringing the input to them, into their community, as opposed to having to seek it out. We're physically in front of them asking for their input, which was great.
Yeah, I can imagine you have to build a little bit of trust, but once you do, they really want to talk about where they live and how you can try and make it better for them, which is great.
Yeah,
Really
and
cool.
some of which happens through translators and
Mm,
other things like that. So sometimes it can be a little bit challenging just on the technical side too.
okay. Really good. Thank you, Brad. Jesse, any thoughts on this? Biggest
Yeah,
challenges?
that's a great question. For me, through this research project, I guess the most challenging part would be find out what would be the possibility, what would be the future goal for transportation planning, because that's a huge topic and it is very important and significant to say for today's how we develop today, how we can utilize the current database model to build a better future. That's the most challenging part throughout this process, and that's everything included within the research project. And yeah, if I just need to evaluate every OpenStreetMap application, that would be overwhelming because it's the it's the most widely utilized data source for network, because people always use OpenStreetMap when they don't have better data source, and it's open to anyone. But what is the real value of using it? Well, it could bring in some possibility to make a better future. That is the most challenging part for me in this research project. Yeah. Thank you.
Really great. Thank you, Jesse. So I'm going to give you a preview of the next question I'm going to ask the group, which is what was the most rewarding part of the work that you did? But I want to give Stephanie a chance to see if there are any additional questions in the chat before you answer that. Stephanie?
No other chat questions, so Adam, go for it. Thank you.
All right, then we will, I think we'll change the order up a little bit. Since I gave everybody a preview, I'll go to Brad first. Brad, what was most rewarding?
I think what comes to mind first, and I'm, just thinking on the spot because I'm going first here, is that, like, pulling the thread from my last comment, speaking with people in the street, particularly adult riders, some of the information that we asked folks was how often they ride and that kind of thing, and how comfortable they are on a bike and biking in the streets, and seeing people who hadn't been on a bike in 10 or 15 years and really understanding that this is for them, that the streets are for them, that the public space and getting involved and answering surveys and being part of the community is something they can do. I think some people kind of write it off and they think, oh, well, I missed that boat when I was a kid. I didn't learn. And they kind of just write off the health benefits and the time and efficiency in commuting. But being able to speak with people and share some of those resources and provide them the opportunity to talk about why that's important to their community, particularly from older adult riders, was just like an interesting piece. I didn't really think about in the beginning of starting this work that towards the end, I really did appreciate and thought that was an interesting way that people wanted to get involved and remain involved in the stuff that we do.
Really great. Thank you, Brad. Okay, Andres. Same question. Most rewarding. Yeah.
Most rewarding, I would say that just the general understanding of how agencies operate and how challenging it can also be to just coordinate from agency to agency. Just learning about that and about those obstacles, although they might be, issues, it was also an opportunity to learn how to address them and how to better solve them. I thought it was that was interesting.
That's really great. Yeah, that can be really rewarding. That's a good point you brought up. Thank you. Jesse.
Oh, I'm so glad you called me out. And what's the most rewarding part of this research project, I guess, it's the experience to work with people in the field, to see how you plan. As you can see that I have 3 supervisors, how to coordinate with all of them in a professional manner is what I learned most valuable things throughout the project. Because I don't literally go through a challenging data collection. That's on my technical side, and that's for me, dealing with people is the most enjoyable and rewarding perspective I learned from this project. Thank you.
That's really great. It sounded initially like something that could have been very challenging, but you found a very rewarding aspect to it. So that was really terrific to hear. Thank you. Last up on this question is Rachel.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think this is a great question. The most rewarding part for me, because my project didn't have outreach elements, although that would have definitely been a lot of fun, probably for me was just working through some of the statistical problems and seeing how much resources on transportation equity have improved over time in terms of like holding programs accountable. I think that database that I mentioned really, really impressed me. So it was just very, very rewarding to see what was out there and to work my way through a complex problem. That's what I would say. And it was so great getting to know people on NYMTC who were on my team, John, Ali, and Larissa, and I definitely consider myself a part of the NYMTC family now.
That's really great to hear. And they are terrific. So I'm glad you got to work with them too. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Stephanie, any additional chat questions? I didn't see anything pop up. I just don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Nope, nothing else has been on there as of yet.
Then I'm going to ask a closing question for everyone, since I think we're getting close to time. And I will, I guess, go in reverse order from Jesse to Andres. So Jesse, be ready. What is up next for you? Either, mostly in your studies, or, where do you see things going for yourself in the next 6 months, year, couple of years, whatever you'd like to talk about.
That's the most challenging question of today's presentation. Can I be the next one?
You're not sure yet? Okay. All right.
I need time to think about it.
You can think about that. We'll go to Brad next. We're going reverse order. So Brad.
Sure. Well, I'm going to continue my studies at the university in transportation technology and delve into the world of geographic information science and more transportation related policies like I mentioned. And at some point I will be a doctor. So that will be pretty cool. So I'm going to keep cranking away upstate at that degree, and hopefully we'll see what happens after that. But that's the primary focus.
That's really exciting. I hope you'll remember us when you're a doctor and come back and maybe share what you're working on then. That'll be terrific. Thank you. All right, Rachel.
Thanks, Adam. I agree with Jesse. This is probably the most hardball question of the day. So,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. I'm currently interviewing for full-time positions at a bunch of places around the country, and I feel like, my work with NYMTC has helped prepare me to move on to that next stage, and I'm very open to kind of seeing what comes next.
That's great. See, that was great. It wasn't hard. That was terrific. Andres?
Okay, so well, I still have 2 semesters left. So I gotta get that done first, and then the idea is to more than likely I will expand on this research for my exit project here at
Great.
Cornell, and in the long term, I would definitely like to be involved, whether it is in the public or private sector, in these types of projects, not only related to just pedestrians and walkability, but also the intersections or with other modes of transportation, especially less car-centric transportation like mass transit. I'm really interested in mass transit as well, like subways, BRT. So yeah, hopefully see what happens.
Will we be calling you doctor someday too also?
Uh, I haven't ruled out that possibility, but
Okay,
I'm not
okay.
sure.
All right, thank you, Andres. Jesse, did you want to, after giving it some thought, maybe
Yeah, I
any
think
additional thoughts?
this is surely an open-ended question, and yeah,
Mhm.
I like it. Um, as I talk in the probably very last slide, we didn't focus too much on the transportation equity, and since now I'm prepared, I'm ready. I have these techniques, I have this knowledge gathered through the research project, so perhaps in a short term, it's not right now, I will come up with a great idea to improve this equity in transportation and do something beneficial to the community. Yeah, that's
I
it.
have no doubt you will come up with many great ideas.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Jesse, Brad, Rachel, Andres, thank you all for your time. This has been really terrific, very enjoyable and educational.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know who takes this over, or do we call an end to it? I'll rely
I
on
think Adam,
Stephanie and Mara.
Adam, you can just bring it home. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for all of our attendees. I think at one point we had up to, I saw 54 folks on the call. So that tells me that there are a lot of people who are really eager to hear everything that you guys had to share with us. And for those, again, who are AICP certified planners, you are eligible for credit for this. So feel free to go to the planning.org website and put in for that credit. And Rachel can get double credit, I think, since she is a presenter. Good for you, Rachel. All right. Thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate this. And we look forward to our next brand bag and look forward to seeing our wonderful students and the great work they're going to do in the future. Thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.